Hi, and welcome to the devlog for Haven. Today, I want to take you on kind of like a journey through how I design and program the game, not as an expert coder, but as somebody who is very much self-taught and primarily focused on the artistry of building a game. I am going to be absolutely upfront. I am not a traditional programmer. I struggled early on with C sharp, constantly running into things like syntax errors that were completely unintuitive to me. Writing traditional code felt like a pain, and it prevented me from making quite literally any progress. As a result, I explored many different tools that could allow me to script functionally without diving deep into raw C sharp and having to worry about, methods and what a void is. Eventually, I found Bolt, which later evolved into Unity's visual scripting, and I've honestly been hooked ever since. If you're unfamiliar, visual scripting provides a node-based system that allows me to create logic without writing direct code. As far as I've learned, it supports almost everything available in Unity's APIs, meaning I can accomplish, as far as I can tell, nearly any of the gameplay mechanics that I want without actually needing to open up Visual Studio. So that kind of introduces a fun, self-imposed design challenge, which is, can I build an entire game with just visual scripting? And I think I can. Now, to some traditional developers, this might sound unthinkable, but I'm primarily an artist. I believe in the world that I'm building. It may sound stupid, but it begs to exist. And this is the most accessible way that I can bring it to life. Now, it goes without saying that visual scripting comes with a lot of trade offs. There may be performance limitations, and I am sure I could have accomplished more by now if I were writing in pure C code and if I were competent in that. But I'm not. And for me, the pros outweigh the cons, especially at this stage of the game. So, with all this said, I want to showcase one specific mechanic that I created for Haven, just to kind of show you how I use visual scripting. Many of the game's maps that I've built are built around a very simple gameplay loop. You enter a map, you fight enemies, you collect your reward, and then you move on. But in addition to all that combat, which is very complex, I want players to stumble upon small interactions that reveal a world hidden with secrets, little surprise and delight moments that kind of add depth to the world and kind of hint at a greater story that you can only barely comprehend. In one map, there is a pedestal with three ancient markers, and the goal isn't explicitly stated, but if the player interacts with those three markers, they activate a mysterious reward at the center. And that's supposed to give a feeling that you unknowingly triggered the remnants of some long lost magic or something like that. And this is just one example of little interactions that I want to sprinkle around the game. And I want to show off how I built that specifically with Visual Studio. So let's go ahead and open the hood. Now, at first glance, I'll be super honest, this looks like exactly what I imagine when I hear the term spaghetti code. But there is a method to my madness, and I'd love to explain. So to zoom out, I kind of want to go over the big basic building blocks. From my point of view, there are two core components of visual scripting. There are the variables, which you see on the left here, and then there are scripts or script graphs or state machines. I'm going to be focusing mostly on script graphs because really I only use one state machine in my game so far. Variables, these are pretty straightforward. They store data needed for logic, like how many markers have been activated, or maybe keeping track of a list of objects that I want to turn off or disable at some point in the future. Script machines or scripts, these nodes or node graphs, they're attached to game objects and in the same way that a script is, and they execute actions based on the conditions and the nodes that I set up within a graph. So let's go ahead and open up one of these graphs and show off what's going on under the hood. So in visual scripting, everything is built using nodes that represent different operations. To put it very simply, these are kind of like Lego pieces to scripts. The logic that is initiated here begins with event nodes that should be very familiar to anybody who is already a power user of Unity. So, for example, start or fixed update, these are things that we would expect or be familiar with. Start obviously initiates logic the moment that a scene loads or a game object comes into being or existence. And then the onFixed update initiates logic for every frame of the game. Now, there's actually another event type that I use very heavily that I'll get back to in a moment, which is called custom events. But the idea is that these events, which are initiated through some sort of logic that happens somewhere else, take place within this script, and I can create logic and interactions by dragging these lines, which are called edges, between nodes that I can create. Now, there's a lot of different types of nodes, and the nodes accomplish many different things and have different subcomponents. And this isn't a tutorial. If you're looking for someone to teach you how to use visual scripting, well, maybe I'll do that at some point in the future, but this is more of an introduction than it is a tutorial. But some of the nodes that I use very often is set variable, which does what you would expect it. It updates the value of a variable. So, for example, I can, based on some other event, I can increase the marker count, for example, or I can, set a variable like nearest target to a particular game object or something like that. Another node type is, for each loops, especially for each on game objects. So I can cycle through lists of game objects and perform actions. For example, looking for the nearest object or cycling through a set of objects, again, in this case, markers to turn them off after I've delivered a reward. I also use the heck out of timers. I probably use it too much, but I've found that I get a lot of mileage out of delaying certain actions and certain logic behind a timer that waits for a certain amount of time before performing the rest of a script. Instantiate object is another example node type that allows me to spawn or create game objects from prefabs that I've created elsewhere. So, for example, I use the instantiate object for lots of things like spawning enemies or spawning rewards in this case, or even sound effects and special effects. If I want to create a puff of cloud, I instantiate a prefab of a puff of cloud that I've created previously. Now, as I mentioned, I was going to get back to this. Custom events are actually the backbone of how I communicate between objects. Visual scripting doesn't allow for direct function calling between C# scripts, which is one of the biggest cons in using this programming language, for lack of a better term. And so I actually rely very heavily on one-way communication between objects. So, for example, in this scene, whenever a player approaches or gets near an interactable object, the player object itself, its script, sends a message to the interactable object saying, hey, I'm close by. And that can trigger a downstream chain of events. Okay, so here is an overview of how I've used these tools to build this little kind of reward mechanic. See, this scene has been set up with 3 markers and a central collector minigame object. The markers and the collector minigame both have scripts associated with them which handle different pieces of logic. Each marker has a script machine that listens for player input, and when a player interacts with that object, the marker sends a custom event to the collector object which tracks progress. If the marker count reaches 3, the counter triggers the reward system, disabling further interactions and plays some effects like a puff of cloud. Each marker also has logic to detect when the player is nearby, and therefore it allows the little kind of like E or A button to pop up based on whether or not you're on mouse and keyboard or on a controller. And here's what it looks like when everything is working the way I intended to. The player marches around with his little troop of, or her little troop of soldiers, hits the markers, and poof, treasure pops out. Now, it is worth mentioning that this is a very straightforward, naive little system. Naturally, my AI logic and core game logic, and heck, even my UI logic is much, much, much more complex than this. But ultimately, I've gotten to where I am just by building little interactions like this, one baby Lego piece at a time, and candidly, all without a single line of traditional coding. So, with all of this said, building Haven with visual scripting has been super rewarding, but also quite challenging. It allows me to focus on designing intuitive interactions and rich environments without getting bogged down by things like syntax errors. While it may be not the most optimized approach compared to, say, direct C sharp coding, it is accessible, it's flexible, and it's candidly been powerful enough for me to do quite literally everything that I've wanted to do so far. I haven't been limited by the technology yet. Now, I can't say I would recommend this approach to someone who's new and starting out and has time to spend to learn new systems. You really might be better off just buckling down, biting the bullet, and learning a traditional scripting language in the long run. And I might be too. But for me right now, with a limited time span and trying to manage a 50-hour work week with other commitments, I am okay with the trajectory that I have right now. And after all, at least I didn't vibe code it, right? Anyway, thanks for listening. I appreciate any of the feedback that you can have, and have just a beautiful day.